stuff in your office. Let's do that.
The cool stuff in my office? Well, I have a letter from John Cage to me, if you know who John Cage is.
Take me to it.
Oh, it's right here. Above this bookshelf. By the way, these bookshelves are great. Whenever I hear that they're getting rid of a bookshelf, I go grab it. So as you can see, I have a lot of books here. John Cage, great American composer. That's a letter from him to me some years ago. Just some random things. There's a bunch of awards over there, sort of piled up with junk piled in front of them. And this thing here is just an alternate cover that the Beatles didn't use for that particular album. And
so you're a Beatles fan? Or?
I'm a Beatles fan. I'm really involved in rock history. I teach a rock history class from time to time here, and the Beatles happen to be more photogenic, and a lot of students like to see Beatles things, particularly curious things like that, which is the original cover for that thing that became the interim cover and so on. Anyway.
Wait, show me these. What? No, I'm confused. This is...
Well, this album, The Beatles Yesterday Today, this was a Capitol LP. It only came out in the United States, and they did this album cover, which is very strange, as you can see, with all these sort of chopped up dolls and so on, and butcher's cloaks. And it was actually from a photo shoot they did with this avant-garde photographer. And they had no idea that Capitol was going to use this for an album cover. So Capitol produced about 200,000 of these LPs before someone up the line said, we can't use these. And so they pasted over them, but they scrambled to get a new cover. And among the designs to replace it were that one, which was never quite used. The one that originally came out has the same picture, but sort of just their images cut out from the background and so on. That's the curiosity, and that, I don't know why I have that, except as I'm telling you, just to show you sort of the alternative. There's rock things here. I was a cartoon artist, essentially, in high school. I drew a lot and sold a lot, and was trying to do my own comic strips. So one of my favorite artists was Rick Griffin, who was the artist behind these psychedelic era posters, and one that's over there. This is a Bugs Bunny cartoon strip that was dedicated to me by Ralph Heimdall, who was the artist back then in maybe 66, 67 in there. And I knew his daughter. She was our art student teacher or something way back when. And so she sort of hooked me up with him. So, and this cartoon actually expresses my way of thinking, my way of lateral thinking, I would say, because I don't know if you could see this or see what the strip does, but we'll move some of this equipment here. It seemed to fit my personality, my way of doing things. So you have Bugs here approaching Elmer Fudd. He says, how about borrowing some wood, Fudsy? My joint's freezing, I'm shaking like a leaf. In a word, no, he says. If one stick of that wood leaves my yard, there'll be trouble. And so minutes later, he hears the fire going on, and of course, he's built a fire in his backyard. So that was the Bugs Bunny way of doing it. It's like, listen carefully, what do the words say? And I'll see how I can work within that, do what I need to have done within those parameters, if that makes sense. So this seemed to be a useful cartoon for me.
So why is that like you? Or?
Well, because I think that I listen carefully to the specific words that are used, and in reading, and say, okay, what's being said and what's not being said, and how do I adjust my life to what is being said or what's not being said, or how can I use the space between those things to, fulfill my own personal calling, my own mission in life, and to get done what I think needs to get done. So
you're not breaking the rules. You're being as creative as possible, so you don't have to.
Something like that. these other images around are just, I collect lots of autographs. I have since I was a kid. And I used to have this wall here actually covered with signed pictures and LPs and so on. And at one point I just decided, oh, I'm going to change things around. But these are a few leftovers. This is when I met Chuck Berry in 1969. And he signed that picture of him from a program. And that's Carole King, the great songwriter, particularly, again, 60s and 70s is my era, I think.
You're kind of living in the past.
So, yeah. Yeah, I think, well, because I think that we all have our own roots music of one kind or another. And these are kind of foundational, kind of pillars, I think, in American popular music and rock and so on. So the same with these Fillmore posters and that era of artwork, as well as the aesthetic. I liked Rick Griffin a lot as an artist, and I have a lot of stuff of his at home. And so he influenced me a lot. But I grew up in the Bay Area. I was born in '56, and I was precocious, 10-year-old. I was getting into all the rock bands when I was 10, and the artwork and so on. So, yeah, living. I don't think I live in the past. I think I'm really progressive in lots of things. But these are sort of touchstones to help me feel the continuity from my young days, in, like I say, in the Bay Area, my young hippie days even, and kind of this feeling of comfort, I guess, a comfortability there with those things. So, but they're all heroes, I think everyone has their own personal heroes for what they do, and
the stuff you do doesn't sound much like something they teach a lot at BYU. Do they teach a lot of it? What is that, by the way?
These mallets here?
Yeah.
Well, these are mallets to this gamelan here. This Indonesian keyboard is one of the parts of a gamelan orchestra, and down here, yeah, all these brass. These are mallets that go with it. But I'm very interested in alternative music of various kinds, and certainly international styles and techniques and tuning systems and sounds in general.
Show me how that works. I mean,
well,
what makes it different from other?
Well, I need to adjust this a little bit. It will sound decent, but sorry. It's sort of stashed away here in a corner, which is the way I found this in the shop in Greenwich Village that I bought it from some years ago. Well, I say this is kind of stashed in a corner, which is the way I found it in the shop in Greenwich Village where I bought it a few years ago. I've always loved the sound of the gamelan, and it has I need to fix some of these here. It's sort of a pentatonic scale, da 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 da, but the tuning is a little bit different in this. You can kind of hear that but different resonance that gives. So why do I have this in my office? Sometimes, although rarely, I will actually just sit down and kind of improvise on it, just playing, because I think the sound itself is very hypnotic, very relaxing, and so on. But I actually use it when I'm talking about the overtone series and musical tuning systems and so on. So next week, for example, I will be bringing this into class to show how the third key of every five and the fourth key of every five are sort of out of tune with our system of tuning on the piano, and some of the particular characteristics of the tuning.
Well, why don't you show that to me?
So, well...
Do we need to pull it out to do that, or I probably can't. There's nowhere to put it either.
Yeah, this is a pretty crowded office, although it's less crowded than it has been, if you can believe that. There's some things rattling here. You have to go in and kind of adjust this occasionally. Some of these resonators, when you move this thing around, but well, I'll show students, for example, that these three keys, for instance. I mean, it's kind of you can play Mary Had a Little Lamb on it, but you can hear that top one is sharp. And it's sort of in between what we would have if you're thinking like the white keys on a piano, and you're starting with C and going up a major scale from there. You'd play E, D, C there, but this one is sort of in between E and F on our keyboard. I'm not giving you the actual pitches, but it's between third scale degree and fourth scale degree. So if I play it as Mary Had a Little Lamb, that's believable. But if I want to play Louie Louie on it, I can do that too, which would be, well, on our pianos, this would be there would be two keys. There would be an E and an F, but here I'm using it both ways because it's in between. Does that make sense? So it's the context that tells you what it is. Anyway, you asked. That's another one that's really tuned differently. And I love that sound. This is called slendro tuning. It's used in Indonesia, in Java and Bali.
So, how many different types of music are there that we don't? I mean, not types as in styles, but types as in scales and stuff. Or they're just. I mean, the pentatonic is uses the notes from our scale, so it's not that far off, right? It's the black keys on the keyboard, I think.
Well, yeah, it's similar. Well, how many different scales are there? There are potentially an infinite number of scales. Not necessarily to human hearing, because we can't discriminate between, further than between certain small distances in pitch. But, and we also have a range that we can't hear above, right? I mean, that dogs can hear higher pitches than humans can hear. I mean, they're superior in that respect. I would assume that divine beings have an extended, if not infinite, range below human hearing as well as above human hearing. So, how many musical scales are there? I don't think we can even conceive of what, in an infinite cosmos, the different possibilities are of tonal combinations or scales, chords, rhythms. I mean, what does it do for rhythm if 1 day is as 1,000 years and 1,000 years is as 1 day? What's the time scale in which rhythm would operate? And by the way, pitch is actually just a fast form of pulse, if you think about it, right? If we think of pulse as rhythm, well, if I speed that up, that regular pulsation, that becomes pitch, or what we humanoids call pitch. So, at what threshold different creatures on Earth or, in the heavens might distinguish between pitch and rhythm is not clear either. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean,
You mean it gets faster and faster? Or?
well, I'm saying if you have a very fast woo, you can hear this resonating to my speaking even.
Wait, do that. Wait, what is? I don't understand that.
Well, I was talking there at one point. One of these started to ring, and I was just saying if I go woo, you can hear these sympathetically vibrating to my voice. But anyway, well, pulse is slow pitch, and pitch is fast pulse. Cycles per second is how we measure pitch, and we'll talk about, A 440 cycles per second, 440 vibrations per second. Well, those vibrations, if you slowed that down to below, say, 10 vibrations per second, which is around the range of brain waves, so when you slow it down enough, then we hear it as pulse. So if I went 4 pulses per second, da 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 da, something like that, you hear that as rhythm, right? Da 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 da. But if I could speed that, da 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 da, I can't speed it up fast enough with my tongue, but that becomes pitch. That fast pulsation then we hear as pitch. You can even hear that if you've ever done, when you were a kid, maybe you went, I can't do it very well right now, but, well, I'm not very good, where you're actually doing the little pops in your voice, slow it down, and then, you see how I started with just da 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 da, and then speed it up, and it sounds like, oh, that's a tone, that's a pitch. Does that make sense? So, anyway, I'm not sure what that has to do with the gamelan per se, but as a composer and as a theorist, I'm really always involved with and listening for sounds. I actually went the other day, this to show you how, what the right adjective would be. Weird is what some people would say. I went and listened to the elevator sound on all the floors in this building, north wing and south wing, because it has a little ding, ding, when it gets to each floor. But I noticed that here on the south end, on the 5th floor, the ding was a half step lower than the ding on the north wing, 5th floor. So I thought, I wonder if that's a difference in wings or a difference in floors and whatnot. So I actually went and checked them all. So I know, I can actually hear now, when I'm in the gallery, I'll hear that ding sound, and I know which end it's on and what floor it just rang on, because I could tell where the pitch is. There's slight differences in pitch. It's all within 1/2 step from F sharp to G. But and I was noting with some humor and feigned, what should I say, a sort of feigned disapproval, that our floor in our wing was the lowest pitch in the entire building. So are you trying to tell us something? I said to the dean with that. Who's in charge of all this? And so I know that the sharpest floor is the 4th floor on the north end, and so on, that kind of stuff. So I'm just telling you, that's the way composers, at least who are composers in the sense that I am, in the ways that I'm interested in composing, very much interested in sound and just the ambient sound around us and different kinds of sound in our environment and on the planet and in different systems of the world and different systems within the Western culture historically. These are all things that really are tantalizing to my ears and the way I think about sound and organizing sound as a composer.
You want to play some?
So.
Play something else for me. That's what I.
Yeah, well, I'm just, I don't really know any tunes. I don't know the I know that one of the characteristics of this from a Javanese point of view is these ostinatos, or just repeating patterns.
So is this pretty well tuned?
Yeah. So you can kind of improvise just little, repeating patterns like that. That I think is very therapeutic. You have those real special, real interesting tunings like that note. You can see that this mallet on the right has been used quite a bit before me. That's the way it came from Java to me.
So what other kind of instruments do you have here?
And so on. Well, in this room, actually, the piano here is unlike any of my colleagues in the School of Music. Huh?
Your piano?
The piano is tuned in the way that Bach tuned it. This is so-called Werckmeister III tuning. It's a 1692 tuning. It's not the same as the equal tempered tuning of nowadays. So it's actually not quite in the best tune at the moment, but if you listen, for example, see in Bach's day, as opposed to nowadays, not every half step was equal. They were the same size. Nowadays, the pianos are tuned so that every half step is equal. So you can play the same thing in every key and it just sounds like it's transposed up a little bit higher. But in his day, they had so-called well temperament. And this is a form of well temperament that's on here, so that if you listen to this major third, for example, listen to that. Can you hear that the next one is bigger? Can you hear that it's wider than that one? It's kind of more dissonant in a way. That's kind of a softer sound. Can you hear that difference? Or take these ones. It's a very sweet sound. This one is bigger. It's more biting. So when Bach would write in E major, that G sharp would pull up to the A because it's high. It's a big major third here. As if he's writing an F, he won't write that way because but this one, do you hear that difference? Really, it's kind of an almost out of tune sound to our ears. It wants to pull up, whereas this one doesn't have a sense of wanting to pull up.
So you mean his choice of key signature?
Exactly. So when he's writing in one key or another, he's going to emphasize the characteristics of that key because each key has its own character to it.
So what are the characters of the keys?
Well, actually in those days, they had very specific meanings attached to the keys, so that C major, of course, was a very, think about no sharps, no flats in the key signature. C major was a very calm, relaxed key. It didn't have any particular tendency, but the more sharps you added into a key signature, if you think about what a sharp looks like, I don't know if you know what a musical sharp on the page looks like, but it looks like a piece of a barbed wire fence. I mean, it's these 4 prongs that are crossed like that. And if you see that on like here on the page in the hymn book, those are sharps. And they have a kind of a spiky look to them. And in the same way, keys that were sharp had a lot of sharps in them. The more sharps you had, the more the key was thought to be intense or strident in some way. So if you had 4 sharps, as in E major, which is what I was just playing in here, that was considered to be a very almost manic key. And you can read in the 19th century newspaper letters to the editor and thing where people are talking about the effects these different keys had on them. One guy talking about how his dog was killed by E major. I love that one, And so the further you went in the sharp direction, the more it was kind of the manic side of things, and more kind of hyper and intense, maybe angry, out of control in that way. The flat side, and if you know what a flat looks like, a flat is, let me get one here. These are flats. And those flats, what do they look like to you? They're kind of like tears or kind of like teardrops. And that image of a flat pertained to the emotional character of a key, so that the more flats you had, the more in the sort of depressive side you went. So, F major, 1 flat, it was sort of a pastoral key. It's sort of calm, a little bit subdued. But you get down to A flat major, or heaven forbid, D flat major. D flat major, you were in what they would say was the Plutonian realm. You had actually gone, into the depths of depression, the underworld, the netherworld of shadows, and so on.
What's in D flat?
What's in D flat? There's 5 flats in D flat.
I mean, what's a piece that's in D flat?
Well, I don't know. I don't play very well in D flat, but you have in Chopin, for example, I'm hedging a little bit because D flat is a very uncommon key, and that was part of it too. The more sharps or flats you had, the less common the key was, the more remote or exotic it was. And so it would deal with more intense kinds of feelings in that key. But I'll give you an example of like with Beethoven, you have the Moonlight Sonata, right, which is in C sharp minor, and it starts with a... I don't know the piece, but it has that sort of haunting, remote, introspective character. C sharp minor often was considered to have. So going back to the Bach tuning systems, in those days, and even up through most of the 19th century, keys had different characters. They really had different intervals in them from note to note, slightly different, but enough that people would associate emotional content, moods, and so forth, psychological states with different keys. And people don't really notice that much today when they play those pieces in the various keys, because all of the half steps in our keys are exactly the same in contemporary tuning systems. So I have this piano tuned in that old style of temperament. I teach 18th century counterpoint, I teach Bach counterpoint, and so on. And in playing through pieces, reading through them, which I don't do very much because I'm not much of a pianist, I like to get into the special sound of that key. And I also like to have it available for students to play who are playing this music, so they can play it and say, oh, that's the sound that he wanted. That's the Bach sound. I had one student come in and he played the C-sharp minor fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1 of Bach, and he just was shaking his head and was over saying, "Oh, that's what it's supposed to sound like." He was just amazed because it really came alive to him, became three-dimensional to him, having access to these more complex and slightly subtler differences among the half steps in the keys. So that's this piano looks like an ordinary piano, but the tuning makes it unusual. There's a guitar here. This is borrowed from my neighbor, but I'll pull things out, play guitar, or use it to show people harmonics on the guitars, whatever.
What's that? What's this?
Well, this is a toy piano, actually, and it's a very sort of non-Western sound. It's really almost like a Far Eastern instrument. I used this toy piano in a piece of mine called Rain Tiger that was performed here a couple of years ago, and it's on a CD that our label Tantera puts out here. And I'm actually writing a piece right now for viola, violin, toy piano, and offstage grand piano.
Wait a second. So when you get the sheet music, it says 5 parts: viola, 4 parts.
But it's
viola,
4
violin.
parts, yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I just lost your record.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just lean those back up in there.
Sorry about that.
Well, I'll show you this because this is.
I mean, if I just saw something like that, I wouldn't quite know where to find a toy piano.
Well, yeah, this old brand, Jamar, is a good brand. But see, I'm these are sketches in this piece that I'm writing right now, and it looks kind of messy, kind of weird. Just instructions to myself. So, and here I'm copying that out in manuscript paper. But you can see we got violin here. The violin is set off in a different place on the stage. The viola is in the center of the stage, and the toy piano is with the viola player. And then you have this piano, but the piano is off stage. So you don't see the piano playing, but you hear it playing. It's somewhat of a distant kind of sound.
Now, I imagine there's some people who would come to a show like that and think, oh, they're just being showy or something like that. But I don't think that's what it is for you. Is that you're actually trying to achieve different sounds or different meanings with the sound?
Well, yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Different sounds, but also, there's a social aspect to music, and most of the music we hear nowadays, as you know, we don't see the people playing it. We hear recordings, broadcasts. That's most of the music that we hear, right? We're not actually seeing the people that are making the music. So I like to play in some pieces, not all pieces, but in some of my pieces, I will sort of play with that idea and have in the piece, as in this one that I'm writing, an aspect of the music coming from an invisible source, and then some aspects that are from a visible source. So, and that's what's happening, as I say, in this piece. The offstage piano is a sort of spectral figure, a ghostly figure. I think that's the kind of musical world we live in most of the time, is these sounds from the air, literally. We talk about being on the air and so on. And that there's something very spiritual about that, this idea of communication from invisible sources. And so in this piece and a couple others I've written, I sort of play with that aspect of it. It's the source coming from an invisible, the music, I should say, coming from an invisible place. So you're not seeing the person playing it, but he's part of the piece, or she's part of the piece.
You talk about pitch and rhythm, or pulse and tone, or I forget exactly what you're saying. It's almost like well, and I think a lot of people think this, that music is access to some sort of divine something or other. But you seem to take it a little bit of an extra level, because you say, oh, I bet divine beings can hear it all the way down when you're...
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah,
I mean that's I guess that's can you cover that? So is that like apostate teaching at BYU? It's not certainly not doctrinal, but it's certainly fun to, or maybe it is doctrinal. I don't know.
Well, I don't think it's doctrine. Well, of course, doctrine. The word doctrine just means teaching. So if I'm teaching it, it's doctrine. But in that sense, in the broadest sense of the word doctrine. But
What is it you
well,
tell
I
your
think,
students? What is it? I mean, this it's a cool. That's a cool thought. I'm gonna go talk
yeah,
to my wife tonight.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, I tell my students, because at BYU I feel, of course, at liberty to just speculate on such things with them, or to get them thinking about music as it relates to, the full spectrum of the cosmos, which involves divine beings. If we believe what we say we do, the idea being, we're in the image of God. God has a physical body. We came here to get a body, and so on. So these aspects of the senses are obviously, it seems to me, to us, parts of the great plan of happiness, the great plan of salvation, and so on, right? I mean, physicality is part of divinity. And so I think that music students certainly have to think about, why does Orson Pratt asked this question in one of his tracts called The Absurdities of Immaterialism. And he has a little section on why does God have ears? And he says, God doesn't need ears to learn things. He doesn't need ears to receive communication. He's not depending on them for that. But he comes to the conclusion, God has ears so that he can listen to sweet music. And I think that's a great idea. So to that extent, it is doctrine. And the question has to be then, well, on what levels can he perceive music as we think of him as having these heightened powers, obviously far beyond. He says, you can't even conceive of my thoughts. My thoughts are higher than yours as the heavens are above the earth. That's the gap. So clearly, it seems to me, if he's listening to music, I don't think it's the same music we're listening to, or at least not the music we listen to in the same dimensions. I think he hears relationships way beyond what we can hear. And I think that since he's in a different time scale, which we know again from Scripture, whether you're talking Book of Abraham or Peter or whomever, that he might be able to hear, say, a pulse of some kind, an event that happens regularly once every 10 years in the cosmos. He might be able to perceive that as a great rhythm. Or maybe he can even perceive it as a really low pitch. So I do invite students to think about all of these things, because I think that it's certainly one of the fundamental teachings of most cultures and most faiths and most religions and most philosophies, that we are musical beings, that we are in some senses made of music. If you're talking about pulsation, rhythm, and so on, what are molecules? What are atoms? They're always in motion in different proportions. And that's what music is motion in sound in different proportions. So, really, many of the medieval philosophers and many of the teachings in universities from the Middle Ages on have discussed music in terms not of, is music a part of us, but are we a part of music? Or is it both? As you look at the proportions in the sky, or you look at the proportions in a conch shell, or whatever it might be, the chambered nautilus, all these things that we see in nature, these proportions we resonate to. And I'm not sure that's in the standard works, but I think that it's in our larger cultural heritage. So, yeah, I don't think it's too far out.
Well, let me get some shots
Sure.
of stuff around your office.
Sure.
I think
Yes.
we're about done. You
Okay.
must have a lot more cool stuff if you've got just these few things that are sitting out, don't you?
I don't know. What would be in here?
A crowded office, I see.
Yeah. Well, you can see that this I'll pull this out. You can see that this toy piano.
Did I knock something over again?
Oh no, I forgot this was back behind it. This is a student's portfolio here. This particular toy piano also is acting almost as a little pulpit. So I have some scriptures laid out here I'm looking at, and I have the Book of Common Prayer here from the Anglican Church, and this is a cassette of Nauvoo brass bands. I'm really involved in LDS musical history, and so I get sent a lot of these things and consulted on, what songs to use, what hymns to use, how should we perform it, and so on. And this year has been a very busy year because everybody's looking for music connected with Joseph Smith. And they're all getting referred to me, I think. But anyway, so you can see this actually has its own little set of items on it that
So
it's
is
accumulated to.
Is it tuned, that piano? I mean,
Yeah, it's just in the way that we're used to. But this is just little hammers striking on metal rods. There's like big long nails in there, but they're a lighter metal and
where'd you get that?
so on. This I bought from a guy who beat me out he's a friend of mine, but he beat me to it at a garage sale, so I had to pay him quite a bit more to get it from him. But this J-Mar is one of the classic makers of toy pianos. And it just had a sound that I thought was very exotic, and I knew that I wanted to use a toy piano in an upcoming piece, as I mentioned to you. It's an instrument that was used a lot by John Cage, and I mentioned to you that there's that letter from him to me. I've been involved with some Cage scholarship through the years, and
What is that?
so.
What does the letter say that he sent to you?
Well, I was doing an article about his studies with Arnold Schoenberg, the Viennese composer who came to this country in 1933, I think. And Cage's accounts, he studied with Schoenberg, but how he studied with him and what he studied with him were sort of garbled in his recollections.
Is Cage still alive?
He's not alive anymore.
He died a long time ago.
He died almost 10 years ago
So it's been
now.
a long time. And most everyone knows Cage from his 4 minutes 33 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Never listens to anything else. It's just,
Yeah, but he has a lot of really great music of various kinds.
what draws you to Cage? Is because he's exploring so much with sound?
Yeah, I've just always been attracted to his way of really approaching the world of sound. And I think that the things I'm saying to you are very connected to his, I won't say aesthetic, but his way of thinking of music as a part of life.
Explain that to me.
Well, music as being organized sound, and therefore incapable of being detached from every moment of our existence.
So
Since
so
all
we cannot be without sound. Is that?
that's right.
What about all those
Well,
deaf people?
Well, we go to the anechoic chamber here in the Eyring Science Center, which you ought to go to sometime. Set up an appointment to go in there. But where Harvey Fletcher, had this room. He had gotten the concept when he worked at Bell Labs, but they've gotten all the resonance out of this room that they can. So the room is got wedge-shaped sort of fiberglass insulation lining the room, ceiling to floor. I mean, it's like 6 feet in all directions, floor. The floor is like a wire mesh net over all of this insulation and so on. And suddenly you realize how much of your life is wrapped up in reverberant sound, ambient sound around you, because you don't have it in that room anymore. And it's really a wonderful experience. But you realize at that point that you have this sort of high-pitched sound going all the time inside you. And the students notice this. Oh yeah, it's the sound of silence, literally. It's what people hear when they think they're totally alone or they're out in the woods or something. And that sound, which is normally obscured by the other sounds around us, is actually the sound of our central nervous system and the electrical firing of neurons and so on in combination. Yeah.
You can hear it in there?
Mm-hmm.
That's all you hear?
You can hear it. You know, it's a funny thing, when you go into the anechoic chamber, I ask the students, so what do you feel like when you come in here? And they say, it seems like my ears are plugged up. And I said, that's because the effect in here, your body is only used to when you have a cold or you're very congested in your ears. And suddenly, when all that ambient sound is blocked out, it's like when your ears are stopped up and you have that kind of, you know, that kind of fuzzy sound in your head. That's all your brain knows how to equate it with. And so your brain says, oh, your ears are stopped up. But they're not stopped. They're not any more stopped up when you go in there than they were before you went in. But suddenly everybody feels like their ears are congested when they go in there.
Who runs the chamber?
Scott Summerhays is in charge of it. He's the head of the, oh boy, I'm not sure what, but it's
Is it
the acoustics
engineering people? Or?
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact name of the.
Let me get a shot of your piano.
So, yeah, of this piano.
Yeah.
Let me get out of here, right?
Probably can't get back, can you? We're too crowded. There's nowhere to go.
No, I can get. There's an accordion here too. I didn't show you that.
Oh my gosh. Why the accordion? I guess there's a lot of interesting sounds out of an accordion.
I use it in different contexts. I use it for pioneer music sometimes, you know, when people are looking for that kind of thing. I use it. I just did a CD of original pop songs recorded down in the studio here, and I use an accordion on some of them just as a backing instrument. So. Yeah. I don't know. Interesting things in this room. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
I see you have a post-it that says back soon, another post that says next door. You're trying not to waste paper there, I guess. Huh?
Oh yeah, these are useful.
That was
Yeah,
creative.
taking care of those contingencies. Yeah.
I need to do some shots. What have we talked about here that I need to get pictures of? Chuck Berry. So who's your favorite group? You have one? Favorite ensemble?
I don't, because the more I'm involved with music, the more I just appreciate the diversity and love things about different groups and different artists. I think I like individual artists best. So whatever group is with James Taylor, or whatever group is with Van Morrison, or what, you know what I'm saying, among pop artists. And then I have composers that I value quite a bit for different reasons. Sometimes quite different composers.
Do you like the old stuff better than the new stuff, or do you have a
in pop music? Well, I can't keep up with the new stuff. You know what I'm saying? I just so many of the older artists keep doing things. I mentioned Van Morrison, the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones got another tour where they're coming to Salt Lake City and stuff.
Are they writing new stuff, or are they just playing?
No, they do write new things and make new albums and so on. So there's some contemporary artists I really, but most people wouldn't know them. I like the group called The Bees. I like a group. I like Mary Amsterberg. I mean, these are people that aren't too well known. I'm not too up on contemporary sort of top 40 hit groups. I mean, I know some of the names, Coldplay and
Someone else.
Well, what is it, Maroon? What is 15?
I have to ask my wife.
Yeah.
I usually listen to jazz as the thing. I
Really,
listen to.
yeah. And I don't think it's a nostalgia thing. I think it's just there's so much richness that you have yet to exhaust in the old, what you're familiar with, that unless you hear something, like I say, if you hear somebody new that really catches your attention and you feel like, gee, they're doing something really different,
Then you want
not just a sequel to or a chintzy version of, but yeah, that's sort of a weird score.
What is this?
That is from a friend of mine that yeah, it's actually a piano piece that a friend of mine in Illinois wrote, gave me a copy of. I've never heard it played, and I don't even know how to play it myself. But
Can you look at this and know what in the? Wait a second now. That doesn't look
Yeah.
like normal.
well, he would do things like this that were sort of in between regular, traditional musical scores and graphic art, sort of abstract
Has
art.
anyone ever played that thing? Or is it possible?
It
to
has
play?
been played. I know he had people playing it,
Could you?
but I never heard it,
Could
how
you
they
give
did
it to two people independently and they would come up with a pretty similar result?
Well, it would be the more similar, the more the conventional notation is used, and then the unconventional sort of graphic artistry, they'd probably improvise sort of wild things, and it would come out different from performance to performance. But it's kind of a neat looking thing.
Yeah, it's kind
So-
of cool looking. I guess you just have to. I guess you play it like that too. You need a big stand,
I guess.
or you set it across the top of the piano.
I guess,
So, do you like
yeah.
John Winston or George Winston?
George Winston.
Or is he's a little too
that's-
poppy, maybe.
Yeah, that's a little, the sort of new age style and so on, Wyndham Hill kind of stuff.
I guess Chick Corea. Well, do you like guys who play the piano?
Yeah.
Play the whole instrument and not just the keys. so
Yeah,
to speak?
yeah. Chick Corea,
That's
Keith
Chick
Jarrett, and people like that I really like a lot. I think Keith Jarrett I'm more partial to for whatever reason.
What's his first name? I don't-
Keith Jarrett.
I don't know if I know Keith Jarrett, but maybe I'll check him out.
Yeah, he was one of the players with Miles Davis in the early 60s, but then he had a whole long career in which he would do improvised concerts and really improvising in all kinds of different directions. And then he got chronic fatigue syndrome and kind of dropped out for a few years, and now he's back playing and so on. But he's an amazing player and amazing to watch as well as listen to.
So, do you play anything exceedingly well? So, I mean, you said, you write obviously, and you hear
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
Do you play anything? I mean,
I'm not really a performer, but I mean, I can play. If you're talking, jazz.
when did you learn that you had musical aptitude?
I play jazz stuff or pop stuff or some classical, but classical. I don't have real classical chops. Classical guitar was my instrument when I was going through university, and that I'd have to brush up on, but I could play Bach and so on guitar. Anyway, you were saying, when did I discover I had musical
Well,
aptitude?
you said
or-
you were illustrating comic books.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good question. I knew that I got interested in composing when I was in high school. I played guitar. My dad had bought me a guitar. When I was growing up, the first instrument I had lessons in was the accordion, because my parents were, from a sort of Lawrence Welk generation, and accordion.
Did you like the accordion?
I didn't like the accordion because this was like 1964, and the Beatles were just
You want to learn
changing
the
the sound.
sitar.
everyone wanted to learn the guitar at that time, electric guitar. And so eventually in 68, I think, my dad got me a guitar from a pawn shop. Terrible guitar, just awful. But I was determined to learn to play that guitar. And so I spent a lot of time working things out, figuring things out on the guitar from records that I had and so on. And then when I was a freshman in high school, don't tell anyone this, but when I was a freshman in high school, I actually cut school for like 3 weeks. And I put a record player on top of the piano, and I would put on these songs, these recordings that I really liked, and I'd try to figure them out on the piano. And I got really intense at doing that. Eventually I had to go back to school, but that became a habit of trying to learn things by ear, figure things out.
So you're an ear player when you play the piano? I mean,
Mostly. I can read now, but...
Do you have perfect pitch? I mean, doing those elevators would require some good sense of pitch.
Well, it's a good sense of pitch. It's not perfect pitch. But, you know, some pitches I can go to... You know, I can go to an E flat. That's pretty close. Because I remember it from the opening of Beach Boys' Good Vibrations. So, you know what I'm saying? I'm to where if I think about it, I can hit some pitches, but most of the time it's just relative pitch. But I don't know why, I was always interested in that sound. And of course, when you're in high school, especially, you know, songs, particularly songs of singer-songwriters and so on, I mentioned James Taylor, you would learn because you really resonated to what they were saying and the feelings and the comments on relationships and it's just a way, you know, like the blues is another thing. I was always interested in playing the blues. And some of it, I think, is just how some people cope. I think music was at that time, particularly sung music, was a way of kind of getting through life, and particularly when you weren't in the jock crowd or you weren't in the nerd crowd, or you're just kind of out there figuring out where your life should go and what it was about. And for some people like myself, music was just a space. It was a world that you could inhabit and express yourself, and as I say, sort of manipulate moods, which is what music tends to do. So.
Cool. Well, I think we're done. I think it's been about an hour. Thanks. This has been really interesting. It's been a really cool office.
Thanks.
Do you ever get trapped in here? Like you're working for once and they realize that you've entirely blocked your exit?
Well, I have had times like that when there's been more in here, believe it or not, and but I really use everything that's in here now. I'm glad I have this big an office. What all my colleagues have done that had grand pianos, on this floor at least, they've all gone to uprights or electronic pianos.
Oh, really? So
they'd have more floor space. But the sound of a grand piano and the feel of it and so on, there's just nothing like it. So, and I'm fortunate to have an office that can hold all this stuff.
And then why the Kit Kats? Is this Kit Kats
so,
here?
I'm just demonstrating that, you know, the grand piano, it's something that big that can fill your office, although it's loaded with stuff right now, is just not the same as electronic piano or even an upright. So this is really the most important thing in here, with the computer probably second. The Kit Kats, I like Kit Kats, but they were having a sale, a post-Halloween sale last year, and selling all their candy, all their bagged candy for 50% off.
Well, you can't like
So
them that much if they're still there.
So I bought a case of them. Well, I got 36 bags of them, but most of it I give away. I mean, I take it out and put it in the jars in the main office typically, but I keep some up here. Yeah, I eat one maybe every couple of days at this point. They're just little, what do they call them? Snack size, as opposed to the smaller ones, which are called fun size, which never made any sense. How
So
smaller
fun
was
size are even smaller
fun
than
is
the size.
smaller, I guess, but
I did not.
that's
The
their
other way around.
that's their